Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and Happy New Year. I hope you guys had a great night last night. Welcome to another analysis video. If you do enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1976. We're going to be taking a look at Lynyrd Skynyrd, and this is one of those videos that I did allude to last night in the live stream, saying that we're going to have another look at them and cover a little bit of the background of the band as well. This is going to be their performance of T for Texas, so let's get the guys up on screen and see how they get on.
Help me out a little. Make it rain.
I'm just going to jump in here just before Steve Gaines's lead solo that he's playing with the slide, because there is so much to look at here, and it's one of those performances that is such a unique take on the original. If you've heard the original Jimmy Rogers version, well, his song back in the 20s, I think there's a performance on YouTube from 1936. You could check that out if you want to. Just to listen to the song as it was originally, because there's yodeling in there as well. So the Lynyrd Skynyrd version of the song is totally different. It's still the same, but they've just injected so much in there in terms of the groove and the feel, and obviously the lead guitar solos. Everything that has been put in there has added to the original track, but has an attitude with it as well. When I talk about the groove that is injected into the performance, it starts straight off the bat with Gary Rossington playing the riff and injecting so much feel in there. And, by the way, Artemis Parr and Leon Wilkerson here, keeping everything so solid with the rhythm section throughout the whole performance. But the thing that's really telling is the way that the crowd join in terms of clapping along on the offbeats. So they're clapping on the ands. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. If we're clapping along, the ands happen between the numbers. So we're going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And that's where the crowd clap along because of the groove that's in there. The thing that you can liken it to is like jumping, and the numbers are when you hit the ground, and when you're on the offbeats, you're in the air. So it has that feeling of always being up there rather than being set. If I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's really solid, really straight ahead, and there's not that groove in there. It's not like that floaty feeling of being on the offbeats. Whereas as soon as you put it in 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4, it just gives it that lift, and that's where the groove is. Like I said, straight off the bat, at the beginning of the song, everyone is on board with just the groove that Gary's laying down. The other thing that we have are the other two guitars that are just muted strumming in order to back up that rhythm, back up that groove, and really keep it moving along. Just a technical performance point to bring up about Ronnie and the fact that he has gaffer taped the microphone to the mic stand. It's interesting to be watching this video so soon after the video that I did on George Harrison and Eric Clapton and everybody else that was on stage in that performance, where the mic moved of its own volition throughout the performance, and George had to keep readjusting it so that it actually pointed towards his mouth. So because Ronnie has got that mic and he picks it up and he's quite mobile around the stage, he's made sure that that mic stays exactly where he wants it. Another thing to look out for when we resume the video is the way that Ronnie, as we can see here, we've got a close-up of his facial expressions, but later on he just has a little look across to Artemis on drums because of the quality of musicianship that Steve Gaines is producing with his lead guitar, the slide that he's playing. And it's great to see that kind of thing where Ronnie is so into his guitar players in his band that he just turns into a fan, and he gets a little bit closer and he just stands next to Steve and just watches the fretboard because of some of the stuff that Steve's doing. And then later on he'll move over to Alan as well. He is so into the music, he's enjoying it so much as a fan of the sound that he's hearing. And when you're watching a band that are just having a great time on stage, it is infectious. You get into it because everyone is so relaxed. Another thing you'll notice is the way that Lynyrd Skynyrd, with this version of the song that they're performing, have really injected those blues elements in there, just keeping that call and response between the lead vocal and, more often than not, an electric guitar or any kind of lead instrument, but certainly the blues, you'd have that lead guitar playing between those vocals. So we have that here, and especially with Lynyrd Skynyrd, that is playing to their strengths because they have that triple threat of guitar talent and guitar ability to go to. Another thing to look out for is the use of the whammy bar by Alan Collins when he's playing his solo lines. It's something that you'll notice just to give that vibrato, not only on the frets, but at the top of bends. So you can have a look out for that, but let's get back into this performance. And there we have it. As you can see, the video's just about to cut out, but what a great live performance. The other thing to look out for is the way that once we finish those guitar solos and we come back into the verse, how everybody just brings that dynamic down in order for the lead vocal to now sit on top. Just to quickly get into the background of Lynyrd Skynyrd, because going all the way back to the beginning when Bob Burns was on drums, he and Gary and Ronnie were on rival baseball teams and they were playing a match against each other. I'm assuming that Ronnie must have been on the opposition to Gary and Bob because Ronnie hit the ball and it hit Bob and injured him. So they stopped playing and they went back to Bob's mum and dad's house and they jammed. So we're talking about Bob, Gary and Ronnie here. And it was then later that Bob said Alan should get involved as well. So Alan came along on his bike, but he saw Ronnie, and because Ronnie was on that rival baseball team, Alan ran away and he hid up a tree or something like that. But then eventually they explained that Ronnie was okay. There wasn't any animosity there. They were just meeting up to jam musically together. So then Alan got involved at that point. This is when Larry Junstrom was on bass and they were called as a band the 1%, but they were getting comments from audience members about them being 1% talent. So they decided to change their band name to Lynyrd Skynyrd after their PE teacher, who was called Lynyrd Skynyrd. It was just a play on his name, and he was very much against students having long hair and really enforced that rule. So they took his name, changed it a little bit, and they gigged in and around Jacksonville and started to get a huge following. They were very well known. Around this time in 1970, Billy Powell was just the roadie for the band. It wasn't until 1972 that he joined up officially because he just played the intro to Freebird, his version of it on piano, and the rest of the band heard it and instantly offered him the position of keys player in the band. This is the same time that Leon Wilkeson joined in on bass. This is 1972, and Al Cooper from Blood, Sweat and Tears heard these guys playing and offered them a contract on his record label. So that record label was called Sounds of the South, but it was supported and distributed by MCA Records. So they set about recording their first album, and at this point Leon left the band due to a fear of fame, and at that point they got in Ed King to then play the bass on that first album, but Leon returned and Ed moved to guitar, which therefore gave Lynyrd Skynyrd their 3 guitar setup for that first album. So that album in 1973, called pronounced Lynyrd Skynyrd, was a huge hit. It sold over 1 million copies, had a single called Freebird, which got to number 19 in the charts, and they toured with The Who. So they were out there playing massive gigs, and their fan base grew rapidly due to this exposure. In 1974, they released Second Helping, which was another massive album. It got to number 12 in the charts, went multi-platinum, and on that album we had a song called Sweet Home Alabama, which, as you know, was a massive hit. It got to number 8 in the charts. And in 1975 is when there were a few disagreements within the band. This is the point at which Bob left and Artemis Pyle, who we can see in this video, then started up on drum duties with the band. In 1975 they released Nothing Fancy, and that was recorded in 17 days. It didn't sell particularly well. It was maybe blamed on a lack of preparation for the album, and this is the point at which Ed King then left the band, and this meant now going forward there were only 2 guitars, whereas the band had previously had that 3 guitar sound for the studio albums and live. In 1976 is when the Honkettes were added to Lynyrd Skynyrd, but they weren't ever official members of the band. They were just there for that backing vocal element. In that same year, they released the album Gimme Back My Bullets, and they were auditioning guitarists as well because they wanted to get back to that 3 guitar setup, and Cassie Gaines, who was part of the Honkettes, said that her brother played guitar and his name was Steve. So they checked out Steve's playing and of course were blown away, and Steve joined the band in 1976, and he was just a massive talent in his own right, because he had the ability not only to play great lead guitar, great slide as we can see in this video, but also had vocal ability to take on a lead vocal if required. So they had been working on and had completed that Street Survivors album in 1977. They were due to go on their biggest tour to date. They also had a headline show booked in at Madison Square Garden, which was Ronnie's dream to play there, but unfortunately things just weren't meant to be. In 1977, just 3 days after they released that album, is when they had their plane crash, and unfortunately Ronnie and Steve and his sister Cassie all died in that crash. Also, Dean Kilpatrick, their manager, was also one of those who lost his life, along with Walter McCreary and William Gray, who were the pilot and co-pilot. And the reason for that crash, unfortunately, was just as simple a reason as not having enough fuel. It was just something that was overlooked, and unfortunately, because the plane was leased to Lynyrd Skynyrd, it means that they were in charge of the regulatory compliance in terms of making sure that all the boxes were ticked and everything was checked. So in terms of any company being responsible for the crash, it didn't work out that way because it was leased to Lynyrd Skynyrd at the time. One of those tragedies, and one of those things that when you look back to performances like this, considering the next band to follow this were the Rolling Stones, and looking at how popular and successful they have been, when you look at Lynyrd Skynyrd back in 1976 on a show where they're supporting a band like the Rolling Stones playing before them, but then actually showing them up and showing what a great band they were. Obviously, after the crash in 1977 is then when Lynyrd Skynyrd as a band were away for about 10 years, which is totally understandable. And then you have the different versions of Lynyrd Skynyrd who are still going, by the way, now as well. And Gary Rossington was one of the guys that just kept going the whole time and is still the only surviving member of the band in terms of from that original lineup. But it's great to have a look back at videos like this and performances like this of Lynyrd Skynyrd taking a song that was totally different to this in its origins and when it was first written by Jimmy Rogers, but then injecting their own sound into it and taking it to a totally different place, but a great place. And one of those things that great bands can do, take somebody else's composition and put their own stamp on it and take it to a whole new level. But thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one.